sentence. You know, sometimes decisions are very, very difficult. On the one hand, in that kind of a case, the victim may not have a whole lot of family that's calling for it, but at the other end of the side of the coin, you want justice. And so it's a very, very difficult balancing act that we have to make every time we seek a case where there are special circumstances that may call for the death penalty. But I would absolutely never have a policy that was blanket that said we wouldn't consider it. It needs to be considered very carefully and thoughtfully.
Well, Dan's right about that, and the death penalty is a very serious thing. And again, to even address the death penalty, it takes a certain amount of experience. I can tell you, I'm the only candidate before you that's ever tried a murder case. I'm the only candidate before you that's ever had to deal with the issue of the death penalty. I've prosecuted 11 people who were death eligible. We've had to go through that process a number of times to do that weighing process. I'm the only candidate before you that has somebody on death row. So I can tell you that I am for the death penalty, for capital punishment as it exists today, because California's law is very, very well written. We're very careful in this county. The times that we have analyzed whether or not we're going to do it, the participation that I've had in each one of those cases has taught me the sort of judgment that you have to make based on all of those experiences. The times I've been to the Court of Appeal, the times I've been litigated in the California Supreme Court, the case where I had to file a writ opposing a writ of certiorari in the United States Supreme Court. Those are the things you have to take into consideration. That's the knowledge you have to take each time you're weighing aggravating and mitigating circumstances. And it's not theory for me. It's something I've been doing for a long time. As a matter of fact, it's been about a decade and a half that I've been working with issues related to murders and capital punishment.
Thank you, gentlemen. This next question will start with Tim. The district attorney's office has a budget of about $15 million. Please describe your experience in developing and in managing a budget of this magnitude.
It's just over 14.8. And I can tell you that my experience was one of trial by fire. When I became chief deputy 6 years ago, it was in fact the worst budget we'd had, well, certainly since I've been here, and I believe it was worse than in the early 90s when we had another really bad one. I can tell you that what we did, we had to make lots of cuts. I had to make lots of decisions because that was my obligation, my responsibility. We had to do things like cut travel. It was very unpopular with the deputy district attorneys. I had to make the decision to cut desktop books. Everybody likes their desktop books. They've now gotten them back. And just in the last month, the hiring freeze, or chill, as they called it, that was on, has been lifted. But those are issues that I had to deal with intimately. I can't tell you how much time they actually take. You actually spend huge portions of your time going through every bit of the budget, going through the grants that you've got, and going through whether or not you'll have the grant and whether or not that grant is going to be there the next year. We have accounts that we have to do with our state prosecutions. We prosecute folks out of the Atascadero State Hospital. We get income from the state for that. It doesn't come very quickly. These are all issues that you have to know about as you're dealing with the budget. And having done that for several years now, I can tell you that we got through the worst of the times without losing a position, without going over our budget. We've done an extraordinary job, probably one of the best in the county, and I'm very proud of that.
Thank you. In terms of financial experience, I've worked in the Silicon Valley prior to becoming a lawyer. I was in the private industry. I worked for Sun Microsystems, a huge company that built IT servers for Fortune 100 companies, $1 million servers. So in terms of handling a budget, I was responsible for a sales budget. And for those out here that have had experience in sales, you know that it's a different kind of numbers game, but nonetheless, you're responsible for a large budget to bring in revenue for that company. And so I was responsible for millions and millions of dollars of revenue for Sun Microsystems, and before that for Acer America. And my responsibility included dealing with the chief level executive officers, whether it were CIOs or chief information officers, chief financial officers, to make sure that they were getting the kind of bargain that they needed to fit their business model. And so, while again, we have different experience, Mr. Covello, for the most part, has really just worked with managing people, managing processes. In terms of the budget, we have a budget analyst in the office that's primarily responsible for that, not one of the chiefs. And at the end of the day, Mr. Shea is the one that's ultimately responsible for our budgeting. As district attorney, you can rely on the fact that I have the leadership skills to make sure that we have the right people to work with. With the county, we'll be recruiting the right folks in the county. We currently have Ms. Karen Boline, who does an extremely wonderful job working on the budget with Mr. Shea. And so you can feel assured that my experience of leadership and my experience working in business prior to coming into the legal community will suit me well in this area.
Thank you. And Tim, we're going to start with you again. Do you support three strikes law as originally written?
That's kind of a trick question, because as maybe most of you know, three strikes law has changed in the last couple of years with the passage of Prop 36. And the way it was originally written, the third strike did not have to be a serious or violent felony. And you could send somebody away for 25 to life if it was not a serious or violent felony. And that bothered a lot of people. And I can tell you it did not bother me. And that's because in the district attorney's office in San Luis Obispo, we've always had a very, very measured approach. The kind of horror stories you hear about, the anecdotes you hear, I think were highly unusual. And there were times that justified 25 to life, but they didn't happen here. I mean, there were many times when you have to get approval from the district attorney to strike a strike, but Jerry was always very, very reasonable about that. And there were many times that I was able to strike a strike because 25 to life would have been unfair. So the fact that we could get justice and it gave us more options was not a bad thing. I also, though, don't have any difficulty with the change in the law. That's fine too, because essentially what we're doing now after the passage of Prop 36 is what we were doing beforehand. So I do support it as it was written before, and I support it as it's written now.
So three strikes is if you've got a couple of prior felony convictions that are serious or violent under the law. There's a couple of penal code sections that define what a serious or violent offense is. Many people in the community believe that one felony conviction, maybe just for grand theft, would be a strike, and that's not the case. So a strike offense has to be a serious or violent, like a rape, like a murder, like a sexual assault, a child molestation case. And so three strikes is a very important law that was passed at a time when we had a lot of violent crimes happening in our community. And people said, why is someone on the street having the opportunity to go back and commit a horrible violent crime against someone again? And so when three strikes was passed, it was very important for California at that time. But as you may have heard, there were some extreme examples where that third strike, where somebody was sentenced to 25 to life for maybe committing a commercial burglary, where they went into a real estate or just a small business, perhaps a gas station, stole a bag of donuts, and then they were convicted of felony burglary and they were sentenced to state prison for the rest of their life. It didn't quite seem to fit that particular crime, even though they were someone that were committing multiple violent crimes in the past. I've prosecuted three strikes cases right here in our community. In fact, about a year ago, I sentenced a domestic violence offender to 30 to life because of his prior 4 robbery convictions where he had victimized folks in our community with a gun going into their home. And he did some horrible things. So three strikes, when it's used properly, is absolutely the right law for California.
All right, thank you. Dan, we'll start with you for this next question. What specific skills do you have that will help you to create a cohesive team in the district attorney's office?
Well, first of all, I alluded to it earlier, I'm a collaborator. I'm a people person. I've even been complimented by my opponent in some of the prior debates that I'm an easy guy to get along with. What that means is I try to live my life by the golden rule and how I deal with other people, whether that be staff in the office, my colleagues, whether it be opposing counsel or the court. I try to live in a way and interact with people in a way that is conducive to building relationships. And I think that what's important in this position of district attorney is that it's a leadership position in our entire county to lead, along with the sheriff, our criminal justice policies and set an agenda for how we're going to maintain a safe community that we all want to live in. And so what I bring to the table is my skills at building relationships with people, bringing people together. That example of the Veterans Treatment Court, it was a tough job. It took nearly 2 years to make it happen. But I worked with partners like Dana Cummings, the Veterans Service Officer, and Greg Sanders, an attorney from Cambria, at the probation department, and the sheriff, and the courts. There were people that had questions. There were people that said, I'm not sure that we can do this. I'm not sure that we have enough cases to even warrant it. But we kept working together, and we built a team that said, this is something worthy of doing, and we can do it. And so that's what I'm going to bring to the table. And the fact that I have the support of every law enforcement association that's made an endorsement so far, most recently the Deputy Sheriff's Association, is proof that I have the confidence of the leaders in our community, the law enforcement folks, that know me because they work with me day in and day out, and they have confidence in my ability to lead.
You know, in terms of collaboration, I've got a couple of decades of having done that in this county. I created our reverse ride-along program for officers, and so that we could work with new officers. Started that program over 12 years ago. We just had, most recently, a group of 5 new officers from San Luis Obispo come through, and we've got some more coming in from Arroyo Grande. I created other programs as well, but Dan talks about his treatment courts. I've worked on 3 of them. The first one starting back in 1997-98, our drug court, which is the largest, most successful treatment court we've had going. I worked on that for 2 years, wrote part of the federal grant to get it going, and have worked on other treatment courts since. Most recently, our community intervention court. So I've worked with the court. I'm actually a liaison to the court for court issues. When the court has a problem, they contact me. But it's just not moving out and up to management. I communicate with everybody in the office. There are 100 employees in the office, and I can tell you that it's not just the attorneys, but it's the staff. I have legal clerks. Essentially, once upon a time, they were called secretaries, and they're much more than that. But when they have an issue, they come into my office, and they sit down, and they ask me what to do. And those folks are very supportive of me. And so I think building a team and cohesiveness is recognizing the value of each and every person in the office, the value of 98 people, not the value of one group.
Thank you. The next question deals with the homeless population, specifically in downtown SLO, but I'm sure that's easily expanded throughout the entire county. But this question does say, how would you deal with repeat offenders in the downtown accused of minor offenses, such as open container violations, trespassing, and public intoxication?
Thank you. It's absolutely a growing problem, and it's something that's not easy. The district attorney on our own can't solve that problem, but what we can do is we can work with our community partners to think outside the box, to create solutions, to work together, to come together with ways